Christina Kelly, the Dumbartonshire farmer's daughter who left Scotland for a new life in New Zealand that would take her to the most remote parts of the southern settlement. Christina Swan would later be fondly remembered as Granny Kelly to generations of Southland and Otago settlers. Her life from her birth in Scotland through to her death here in Invercargill was marked by tragedy and adventure in equal measure, making her an outstanding example of a pioneer woman in 19th century New Zealand. Christina Swan was born at Bonhill in the Vale of Leven, Dumbartonshire in 1808, the eldest daughter of a tenant farming couple of modest background. Baptised as Christian, her name was often written in contemporary sources as Christina, and when she learnt to sign her name late in life, she wrote it as Christin, Christain, and Christina. We'll use Christina here just to be consistent. Her family moved at some point 5 miles to the neighbouring Cardross parish, and it was there that she met and married a labourer named Dugald Niven. Their first child was born at Cardross 3 months later. By 1834, the Nivens had moved back to Bonhill, where there was plenty of work as the town's numerous textile factories boomed. Cutting-edge new technology made Bonhill a leading centre of textile printing at this time. The accompanying rapid population growth had its downsides though, with the stream running through the town deteriorating into an open sewer. Outbreaks of infectious diseases were common. Christina gave birth to 5 more children over the next 10 years, but lost all but 2 of them to disease, including her firstborn. Entries in the family Bible record the ages of each child in years, months, weeks and days. A haunting level of detail that gives some idea of the trauma involved. The Nivens then shifted to Rutherglen, another highly industrialised township on the periphery of Glasgow. There would have been plenty of work available for a working man like Dugald, while Christina looked after their 2 surviving daughters and gave birth to another son there in 1845. He was baptised in the local Church of Scotland parish register rather than in the Free Church, which raises questions about why Dugald and Christina signed up to be part of the pioneer Scottish party to establish the Free Church colony in Dunedin 2 years later. The desire for a fresh start and better prospects for their children seems a more likely motivation than any commitment to the Free Church cause. Dugald and Christina set sail for Otago from Greenock as assisted passengers in steerage on the Philip Laing in November 1847. With them were daughters Mary, aged 13, and Christian, aged 11, and 2-year-old William. The 5-month journey must have been particularly challenging for Christina, however, because she was already pregnant when they set out and gave birth to another son 5 weeks out from Dunedin. He was baptised David Alice Ramsay Niven in honour of the ship's captain and doctor. The Philip Laing remained home for Christina and the children for the next 6 weeks after their arrival at Port Chalmers on the 15th of April 1848. Dugald and other male passengers, meanwhile, helped construct a primitive barracks on the site of Dunedin. Moving into these barracks was Christina's first taste of the challenges of pioneering, and we can picture in this scene as recounted by historian A.H. McClintock.
The flimsy barracks were no place to house women and children during the soaking winter rains. It is recorded that on one occasion, when Burns visited the dismal place to conduct a service, his heart sank within him. For some of the women, with babies on their laps, were crouching on the low beds that were kept from the damp floor only by a layer of grass and fern. The wind was whistling through the thinly covered walls, and heavy drops of water, soaking through the poorly thatched roof, fell noisily into pools of ever widening on the miry floor. Little wonder that some of the women, heart-stricken by the appalling hopelessness of their surroundings, were silently crying.
Dougal wasted no time securing better accommodation for his family, constructing a wattle and daub cottage above the future line of Princes Street, right next door to Captain Cargill's first house. We can see the cottage in this drawing by surveyor Charles Kettle, looking down Stafford Street in 1850. But by the time that sketch had been made in 1850, tragedy had already struck. Dougal was dead, killed while felling a tree out here in Maungatua in December 1848. Family stories tell of Christina finding his body when she went looking for him with the baby strapped to her shoulder. It must have been an awful shock to be widowed only months after arrival. How did Christina cope? What resources could she have drawn on to support herself and the 4 children? There are hints in Reverend Thomas Burns' records of his annual visitation of all the houses in Dunedin. Even before their father's death, the girls had been working in the homes of some of the settlement's leading citizens, the Kettles and the Andersons, and later the Carnegies. No doubt Captain Cargill kept an avuncular watch over his neighbours, while the church community must have felt a duty of care to one of its very first widows as well. A more independent option emerged in December 1850. John Kelly, the veteran Foveaux Strait boatman and trader, came calling. A former convict from New South Wales, Kelly had first arrived on the southern coast as early as 1824. He set up base on Ruapuke Island, then the southern headquarters of Kaitahu, and married the sister of Kaitahu Ariki to Hawaiki. 3 Maori wives later, Kelly was now a widower with children from those marriages to look after. On one of his regular trading missions to Dunedin, he must have put it to the widow Niven that they might unite their fortunes and their families and build a new life together back on the island. Kelly and Christina were duly married in Dunedin on the last day of 1850. They then headed south, Christina accompanied by her 11-year-old daughter Christian and 2 young sons to join Kelly's mixed-race children at Ruapuke. 2 years later, Christina gave birth to a son of their own, also named John, and then in 1854 another son, Samuel. This made for a very modern-sounding his, hers and theirs combined household. Christina was a Pākehā woman in an overwhelmingly Maori community, which must have been something of a culture shock for a working-class woman from lowland Scotland. She seems to have coped just fine, forming good relationships with her Maori stepchildren. She was not alone, however. The German Lutheran missionary Johann Wohlers had been working on Ruapuke Island since 1844, and in 1849 he married a Wellington widow, Eliza Palmer, and brought her back to Foveaux Strait with him. Christina's arrival on the island in 1853 proved a great boon for Eliza Wohlers, especially when she gave birth to a daughter in May of that year. The minister wrote to a friend at the time, "I must here mention that Mrs. Wohlers has been greatly assisted by Mrs. Kelly. Kelly's Maori wife having died, he's married a widow from Dunedin, Otago, a native of Scotland, an excellent and kind-hearted woman." Christina lived on Ruapuke Island for 4 years, but then the Kellys relocated here to the mainland, where John established a house, a stockyard, and a large vegetable garden, just beside a sandhill which appears on early maps of Bluff as Kelly's Knoll. Now, there's no sign of it now because the sandhill was levelled as the settlement of Campbelltown, later renamed Bluff, expanded seawards. It seems like this should have been a good strategic location for John's boating operations around Foveaux Strait, but the Kellys didn't linger. In early 1856, they relocated again, this time to the New River estuary at what would soon become the site of Invercargill. They left behind their infant son John, who died at Bluff in August 1855, just days short of his 3rd birthday. This plaque in the centre of Invercargill commemorates the site of Kelly's Point, a landing place on the banks of the Otarewa or Utupuni stream where Kelly offloaded new arrivals and goods from his boat. He erected a large whare for the family nearby, and a stockyard where they ran a small herd of cattle was just behind the cinema over there. As soon as Invercargill was surveyed, he secured 2 sections on Tay Street, as well as rural sections at Seaward Bush, what's later called Enwood. His boating business was thriving, with his decades of experience in the region a great resource to the newcomers, and a friend recalled him keeping a bag full of gold sovereigns under his bed. Christina gave birth to her final child in the whare here in July 1856. They named him John too, recycling the name of their recently deceased boy, just as Christina had done with her lost children back in Scotland. And then, in a terrible repeat of her previous loss, Christina's husband John died quite suddenly of what may have been cancer in May 1857. Once again left a widow with young children to care for. At least this time she was well provided for in John's will. She would live at various places around town in the succeeding years, but she remained for the rest of her life in Invercargill. Tragedy had been a leitmotif of Christina's family life long before she arrived in New Zealand. The roll call of premature deaths hardly let up. In 1858, her stepdaughter Kitty Kelly was drowned in a boating capsize en route to a wedding on Ruapuke Island. In 1875, her Scottish-born son William Niven also drowned, leaving behind a young family of his own. And her Ruapuke-born son, Samuel Kelly, died of tuberculosis in 1883, aged 29. His 2 young daughters died the following year from diphtheria. That was also the year her eldest daughter, Mary Cameron, died in Christina's home, also from tuberculosis. In fact, Christina was to outlive 2 husbands and all but 3 of her 11 children. These might all be classed as private sorrows, but fate had one more trauma for Christina to face, and this one in a much more public way. In the early 1860s, her younger sister's daughter, Wilhelmina, turned up in Invercargill with 2 young children in tow. Seeking shelter with her long-lost aunt, the young woman posed publicly as a widow, but in fact, the children were both illegitimate. Minnie, as she was known, did eventually marry in Invercargill, but her life was to go dramatically off track in the 1880s, with bankruptcy and the deaths of babies in her care, all griefs no doubt shared with her aunt. We've told the story of Minnie Dean in an earlier episode, noting her connection with Christina Kelly, so we won't repeat it here. Suffice to say that Christina's niece was sentenced to death and executed in Invercargill in August 1895, found guilty of baby farming and becoming the only woman to be hanged in New Zealand history. Perhaps fortunately, Christina missed this final disastrous end to her niece's colonial life and the public shame that it attracted. She had died in 1891, aged 83. Widely respected in her own right, this headstone in Invercargill's Eastern Cemetery acknowledges her family's status as Invercargill's original European settlers.